Hi, my name's Khaleefa Hamdan. I go by the stage name Paula Child. I'm a spoken word artist, hip hop artist, youth worker. Used to be a radio host. There's a lot that I do, a lot of slashes in the name. Been doing art in the city for almost 14 years, I believe. Started when I was 19. I'm 33. The math tracks, 14 years. And what initially drew me to spoken word was I grew up very shy, very quiet. I'm second of seven children. At the time when I was growing up, it was more like I think five, and it's easy kind of to get lost in all that shuffle. My older brother used to do all the talking for me. I was painfully shy. Um, and then when I found spoken word, I actually found it through hip hop. I was writing hip hop verses at first. I still write hip hop now. Shout out to Funky Colors. Check out our single, Mike Miller. Plug plug. But through hip hop, there's a producer, legendary producer, Pete Rock, and he has a series called Soul Survivor. And on Soul Survivor 2, um, the intro was done by a spoken word artist by the name of Black Ice. And at the time, that's how I found my music because, there's no Spotify recommendations. And if there's an artist that I like who had a feature, and I really like that artist's style, then I would check out their discography. And, then that leads to another discography and so on and so forth. So I thought Black Ice was a rapper. So, I consulted the great sage Google, the modern great sage. And I found out that Black Ice is actually a spoken word artist, and he was featured heavily on HBO's Deaf Poetry Jam, which is pretty much like that generation's button poetry. Like it was massive. It aired on HBO for God's sakes. So I discovered that and just consumed the hell out of spoken word. And at that point in my life, I was entering high school, and we grew up in residential housing and stuff like that. Like the area wasn't the worst, but it wasn't the greatest either. You saw stuff happen, you heard stuff happen, people that know people, people that, So I was never really about that. It was never, drew me to it, but that's where you had to be in those neighborhoods, you had to survive and stuff like that. So when I found spoken word that was like socially conscious, aware, uh, true to who they are without having to be that other side, um, that was me, and the spoken word artist was like the coolest thing to me at that age. And I told myself that that's what I was going to be. Actually, one of my main goals and missions as a spoken word artist, like I would tell people, yeah, I'm going to be on Deaf Poetry. That's what I'm going to do. I will be there. We'll be on there. Just give me a few years. I'm going to be on there. Then eventually, unfortunately, it got canceled. But I'm on Bun Poetry, so I kind of did it somewhat, But yeah, it's been my poetic journey. So my approach to my creative process is very loose, very open. It was a lot more structured back then when I first started, but now that I've been doing it for a while, it's almost become second nature. I still write my poems as if they're hip hop verses. I'll put the numbers because with hip hop you have 16 bars. 16 bars is a verse. Sometimes it'll be a little less, sometimes a little more. But the standard hip hop beat has 3/16s, which is like three verses, 3 16-bar verses. And when I was slamming, and the difference between spoken word and slam, because not a lot of people are familiar. Spoken word is the art form, slam is the competition. So slam is like the rap battles of spoken word poetry, pretty much. Anytime it gets graded, it's a slam. And that's how I came up. Fresh out of high school, 19, jumped into slam. Went up against people. I was very small fish in a big sea. I came in very cocky. I was like, yeah, they never heard anybody like me. I'm gonna go in. I'm gonna kill it. And then I got the floor mopped. They just mopped the floor with me. It was absolutely crazy. But I was slamming against people who've gone on to become world champions. So shout out to my older generation, the legacy, the legends, and that forced me to get better quicker. But the one thing that always remained true is I still write my poems as if like they're hip hop verses. And the reason why I bring up slam is you have 3 minutes with a grace period of 10 seconds. Um, and I had to play with that formula because I couldn't always time myself. And I realized, by writing 24 to 32 lines with 16 to 24 syllables per line, I'm roughly hitting the 2 minutes, 30 seconds, sometimes 2 minutes, 20. So I knew I would never go overtime, and it would give me enough time that if I messed up, that I could recover. And then if I couldn't recover in time, I had that 10 second grace period to recover as well. Because if you go over, they deduct score from you. And when I was trying to make the national teams and stuff like that, I was like, that absolutely could not happen. So That's still something I do today, even though I don't really compete as often anymore. But I stay true to my roots with that. It's very mathematical, and I've never been a mathematical guy. So in terms of rituals, not really. Before, yes, I would have to listen to music, light some incense, make sure I had coffee. But I'm very nomadic in my day to day life, meaning I am constantly, constantly on the move. And I had to adapt to that. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to write. So um, I told you off mic or on mic, I can't really remember, that I work for a 24-hour care group home. I spend a lot of time there. So I've learned to just write on my overnights there. Like I am allowed to sleep, but I'll like block out a chunk of time for me to be able to write. So that's been very fruitful in terms of creation. And if I have like any time in between, because I'm out in Manitic, you know, so if I have time, like for example, we're here today in downtown, and then I got work right after. But if I had like a little bit of a time frame, I would just find a coffee shop or somewhere I can just sit and be quiet and fill the time with just writing and stuff. So I've learned to just kind of have my creativity be on the move like I am. So my art has served as a form of therapy for me in a lot of ways. Like I said, I grew up very shy, very quiet. After performing to two, 300, 400, 5 plus people, one-on-one interaction really doesn't become that hard. So it really forced me out of my shell. That and like my hip hop stage work as well. I don't want to just like give all the love to the poetry. I'm multifaceted, as most people are, and I've experienced a lot of grief, a lot of loss. It's been, and I know everybody does, but it seems like every year or two, somebody close to me seems to pass away. Um, and having art and poetry and being able to kind of write out your feelings and put it on a page so it's tangible. Um, it really like, I don't want to say expels the emotion out of you, but it makes it a little more manageable to be able to face it, see it right there, and know that, okay, I am bigger than it. And at the end of the day, we are the vessels for the emotion, not the other way around. And I think that's a very, very important distinction. And the act of writing, I'm a huge advocate for writing in general. It doesn't have to be creative, it doesn't have to be poetry, it doesn't have to be hip hop, just writing in general, journal, writing notes to yourself, whatever it is. I encourage you to write because I learned a lot about who I am through the act of writing that wouldn't have happened had I not wrote. So I know firsthand the value of it having grown up within it. I know I started performing professionally when I was 19, but I've been writing since I was 12. And here I am now, 33. I'm a lot more confident with myself. And when it comes to feelings and I feel a certain way, I do my check ins now and I know exactly, okay, I can trace it back to what the initial source might have been. And I realize that that's not really something that most people can do. And I feel like just by writing it and getting the process and just getting it out, it makes everything just a little more manageable and you know yourself a lot more. So my style has changed a lot throughout time. I started out doing what they call flow pieces because again, I came from my hip hop background, so I would perform as if I was rapping without a beat, which is fine. It got me some traction, some distance. I'm not going to name names, but one of the huge OGs, the biggest mentors, one of the biggest poets in the city at the time, I remember pulled me aside. This was back when I was 19 and just starting. He's like, "Yo, you need to change your style. Nobody likes flow pieces. You need to be more like me, more like the New York style, whatever." And back then too, with the Ottawa scene, Ottawa was a hub for spoken word. Again, we bred like two world champions. Like take that in. So they weren't as polite or delicate about it back then. So I'd go out, I'd perform, I'd go to a slam, and then people come up to me and they'd be like, "Yo, your poem sucked," and I'll tell you why. There's like no tag, no candid, like, "Yo, your poem sucked," I'll tell you why. And it's hard not to let your ego get in the way in those moments, but also criticism is valid. So, I learned to sit there and take what is valid that I think might work for me and then leave sides like, the New York style. I'm like, that's not really me. Like, I've never been to New York. I still haven't been to New York. One of these days, maybe I will. But I don't know what New York style is, man. Like, can you give me a little bit more direction with that? So I just kind of stuck to my own guns and then adopted spoken word to be my own. And like, I think that's one thing that I absolutely love about poetry. I teach poetry as well. And that's one thing I tell the youth, whoever it is I'm mentoring, that there is no wrong way to do poetry. You just do it. It's as individual to you as your own fingerprint, and that is a beautiful thing in general. That means that there is no margin of error. You just do it. You just be, and especially in this fast-paced society where like to be able to just be is kind of diminished. I think those moments are very, very important. But to go back to your question, I started out doing flow pieces, and then I've learned to kind of, okay, you don't always have to. I used to rap very fast or like perform very fast, like I was Twista, and I was like, okay, you don't always have to do that. Like it was a gimmick at the end of the day. It's like you write these words, and it really came at me, not to change ideas, but it does tie back in. Came at me after I did my first nationals in Saskatoon in 2012. Um, there's a Canadian spoken word legend, Truth Is, much love to Truth Is, and Truth Is came approached me at the after party and was like, "Yo, your poetry is so beautiful," but I was very loud. I was like the angry brown man, very loud, and they're like, "Your words are very beautiful, but you're yelling them. It's like they put it as it's like trying to catch a butterfly in a whirlwind, like, slow down, take your time, like nuance it a bit." And that was my trigger point. Like I was like, okay, that's when everything clicked in. I was like, okay, I need to do things a little differently. So 2013, I took the year off. I just opened mics and gained experience that way, tried new styles, adaptability is big in everything that I do. And then 2014, I came back, and that was my record year. I became team captain, team champion. I wrote My Hero Drives a Cab, which later got picked up by Bum Poetry. I spoke on it a little bit, which became my signature piece in spoken word. It opened up a lot of doors for me. And that was the first poem that I wrote in that style, where I'm like, okay, I can still be me. I can rhyme, I can write my story, but I can also adapt some of the constructive criticism that I got in order to further myself as an artist. So there have been a lot of challenges. I think just being a creative and being an artist is challenging in general. Creation's not easy. If anybody or everybody could do it, they would. To just kind of sit and have something happen. It doesn't always work that way. But one of the main ones, I spoke to it a little bit. Being 19, being young, being like legit fresh out of high school, uh, and then performing and competing against adults, especially ones who've been doing it for a while, who have merit, and then them telling you, "Hey, you should give up. Hey, you should quit." Like I almost took that to heart, but thankfully, one of my senior poets, Graham, he used to go by Lowell. He approached me at one point after slam. He's like, "Hey, man, I really, really like your stuff. Like, keep it up. It's very unique to you, and we don't really have that in the city." And just having that small encouragement there really kind of forced me to keep going. Other than that, like lately, it's been scheduling. I do too much, I move too much, and sometimes I overbook myself. I need to learn how to say no more, and also understand and learn my value. Sometimes I do lowball myself, but I love what I do, and I believe what I do, and I believe in the art. Um, that sometimes it's hard to say no. Like I know the capacity that sometimes people work with, and it's not always like all right, I can do it. I love poetry too much to give it up. It's ingrained in me. My father was a spoken word artist too. That's what led him to getting exiled out of Kuwait at the time. I spoke a little bit about it on My Hero Drives a Cab. You can check out. I did a video on it. It's on YouTube. Um, One of my favorite poems, resonates especially harder now that my dad has passed away. But yeah, to just be able to kind of find moments to create and also remember that I'm still a creative even though I am not creating. Because I went through a period where I was just focused on arts admin. I was running the Urban Legends Poetry Collective. Shout out, check them out too. They're still active in the city. They do a lot of great shows. And that plus work, plus doing the radio show, just monopolized all of my time. All of my time. We were running two radio shows at the time, plus being like part of a hip hop crew, and we were like starting to make some moves, and starting to grow in popularity. So it just became too much to actually create for spoken word, and I felt really bad about it, and I felt like I was less of a poet and whatever and all this. But it's important to remember that again, like you are the vessel for the creativity. You are not the poet because you create. You are creative because you are a poet. So just that distinction, I think, was very, very important to me, and realizing that it's in me and it'll always be within me. And even if I pump the brakes on it for a little bit, that's okay. And also if I just create for myself and not have to put it out, especially coming from a competitive background and the competition was every 2 weeks. So the moment I was done one competition, I'm like, all right, I need to write new poems for the next one. So I know how to score, I know how to grade, and like I have some fresh stuff. I'm not coming in with old stuff. And I got into this habit of, okay, what's the next? I need to create for this. I need to create. And then you create for the competition. And then you find that you're not really writing stuff that you want to write. You're writing because you want to score well. And taking a pause and a step back from all of that, I think was very, very important. So that's one of the biggest challenges I faced actually was, trying to get back to creating and realizing that I am still a creative, even though I don't write at the output that I used to write in. So having a long career, there's been a lot of ups, a lot of downs, a lot of successes. Some of the cooler stuff I've done, I've been flown out to Atlanta twice through the Canadian government to represent Canada in the Martin Luther King International Art Expo that happens at the King Center. So I met Bernice King twice. I got to see her speak twice, which is really cool. The first time they had me perform, they had this giant Canadian flag behind me. It was very patriotic. And I had this poem, literally starts with all of these Ottawa Anglo-Saxon streets are sweet, but I know there will never be one named after someone like me. And I was like debating on whether I was going to do this poem or not. My ex-girlfriend was in the crowd and she knew because, I discussed it with her. And then they had this big Canadian flag. And I was like, maybe I shouldn't. The Canadian consulate paid for my trip. They paid for the hotel. They're paying me to be here. Maybe I shouldn't bite the hand that feeds me. And then this giant flag halfway into my performance just falls, like misses me by inches. And I'm like, I've been doing this for a while, so I'm not phased. I'm still like mid poem. I'm still going. And like I didn't jump and didn't cut me off or anything. I'm a professional, goddamn it. And then the moment that happened, I'm like, I'm doing the poem. I looked at my ex and she just knew. We nodded at each other and she just knew. And I did that. And in that poem, there's not only does it talk about like the legacy behind like being a person of color, although I hate using that term now in Ottawa, but I have an I have an Outcast reference within it. And they're from Atlanta, so doing it in Atlanta for the first time and just getting that reaction was amazing. And then afterwards, Bernice King approached me and she's like, "That poem's very, very important. I'm glad you did it because we fought for years to get a street named after my dad, and I just want to remind you that it's not impossible." So I actually started. Shout out to Jamal Akbari, just Jamal the poet. I got into the process of trying to get a street named after him. A lot of bureaucracy. They gave me a bunch of documents. It was approved though. It was approved. I just had to file all these paperwork. I had to write it out, whatever, and then send it back to them in order for it to happen. But then COVID hit and they shut down, and I couldn't get any response. And then eventually I lost the papers. So I need to kind of get back at it. But lately I've just been so busy that I haven't been able to. Anyways, I'm a rambler. I talk a lot. I talk for a living. I like to think of it as making up for times when I grew up very shy. But to get back to the initial question in terms of successes, that was a really, really cool moment, minus the flag drop. Uh, Again, I was on Button Poetry, which is one of the biggest poetry organizations in the world right now. Through a contest, I submitted My Hero Drives a Cab through their Cinepoem. Cinepoem is like a music video for spoken word poetry. I submitted it to the contest and I won a runner-up, so they still showcased it, which was really cool. I made a book, which I mean, my legacy cemented forever. I made a book. I'm immortal. I just need to get better at making more prints of the book. I so far sold out 2 prints. I'm on my third right now in the process of it. I wrote a manuscript for my second book. I just need funding to kind of help put it all together and put it out. And I already have a third that I'm working on as well. I wrote a short film, like short film, spoken word short film that I want to kind of get off the ground again. I just need funding for it. And I got to meet a lot of my spoken word heroes, a lot of my hip hop heroes. Like it's been a wild ride. Like I met Black Alicious, Gifted Gab, rest in peace, passed away. We opened up for Far Side for their 20-year anniversary. I think now they're at their 25-year anniversary of the Bizarre Ride. Uh, I got to meet Soul, which is like an underground hip hop legend as well. Performed with like Atmosphere and Aesop Rock and all of these like legends that I grew up listening to. Because I did go through like a bout of depression when I got out of high school and into university because I didn't want to be a student. I wanted to be like a full-time artist, take a year off, figure myself out for a bit. Um, but coming from an immigrant family, I was the first one to graduate high school. on time and with the grades to go to university. So the expectation was go to university, get a career, help the family out. But that's not what I wanted for myself. Excuse me. So I dropped out, didn't tell my family. I just did it and started doing art full time, working part time, which later became full time. And once my parents found out, they flipped. They flipped. And then I was kind of like ostracized from the family for a little bit. And growing up very shy, very quiet, like family was like one of my main connections. And to kind of be cut off from that, I went on a downward spiral for a bit. But again, I keep bringing up the poem, My Hero Drives a Cab. Like in it, I do talk about that experience a little bit because eventually, like, it did lead to, I don't want to say a confrontation, but a conversation between my father and I where I admitted all of this stuff to him. And just the guidance and the wisdom that I got from him really helped kind of keep me going. Spoken word really helped keep me going. Hip hop, art in general, like I genuinely would not be alive today if it wasn't for the arts and being able to express myself in a way where I'm like, okay, I am valid. I am valid. And I do deserve to be here. I do deserve to breathe. I do deserve to create. I guess maybe that could have been in the challenges part. But one of my successes is being able to kind of rise from that. And that's why I love art so much. And that's why, like, sometimes money isn't always the most important thing, and why I want to give back as much as I can. I've seen a lot of my proteges kind of grow up and become powerhouses in themselves. Like one of them, Haneen, she's working at CTV now, and like is a great spoken word artist. I don't think they're as practicing anymore, but to kind of grow up into who they are. Maya Spoken was another one. One of Maya's first shows was with me through the city of Ottawa. It was something I was organizing, which that in itself didn't really go well, but I got to meet people like Maya, which was pretty cool. And to be able to just kind of give back and see what some people do with the tools that you gave them and you equipped them. Not that I'm trying to take credit for anything or anyone or any of the successes, but to know that I was there in the beginning stages. Ali Soulful Poet, he was another one that I met very early on in his career. Mazin, who used to go by Cafe. Uh, and even like a lot of hip hop dudes in the city, like, especially with our radio show, we had a huge focus on local. So, and then we would play the full hour. We were on 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. every Wednesday. Like, it was a rough block. So if people came by for an interview, we don't do interviews until 3 a.m. But because we had 4 hours, we would play their full album from top to bottom, no pauses, no interruptions. We're like, we're not just gonna play a song or two. Like, you dedicated time to be here, we're gonna dedicate time to you. So my radio show was one of the first to play Misha's music as well. Like, Misha's a dope artist, dope creative in the city. Like, I love her work, huge fan. And like all the artists that I named, I'm a huge fan of as well. So to be able to kind of see them blossom and boom and become powerhouses in their own right, it just goes to show you. And not that I'm taking credit for it. The point I'm trying to make is it just goes to show you just the power that art has within one's life. So I create a balance between creating art for myself and creating art for others. Which again, maybe I should have spoke to this a little bit too, in my creative process. Um, had a little bit of a brain fart, but one thing that I always do before I write my poem is I journal a bit. I always start with a bit of a journal entry, and I ask myself, how am I feeling? It's like a check-in. How am I feeling? Why am I feeling? What do I want to write about? Why do I want to write about this? And why do I feel like it's important to write about? And just by answering those questions, not only does it warm me up for creative writing, because again, creative writing is not easy. To be able to just create something from nothing is not easy. It warms me up for the creative writing, but also it serves as my guide and my compass. If I ever hit a wall or if I can't like foresee what the next line is, I go back and I read that, and usually it kind of helps bring me back to center, ground me. Um, but to answer your question, the balance, usually how I answer that really dictates on it. Is this a poem that I want to share, or is this a poem that I want to keep? Again, it is something that I had to learn because growing up in the arts and being a competitive poet and having like every 2 weeks to try to refresh and write new stuff, anything and everything I was writing, I was like, I got to bring this to stage. I have to bring this to stage. I admitted to my depression and my suicide on stage to a room full of strangers before I even talked to my own family about it, and that's something that I do regret. Like that's, and I did it all like because I'm like, okay, well, these are the only people that I'm seeing. this is the only like social connection I have at the moment, and I feel more comfortable telling them and having them deal with it than me talking to my family and being like, hey, look, this is something that I've been struggling with. So after, going through moments like that, which isn't fair to the audience, I'm a big fan of like, you got to take care of the audience. The power dynamic, a lot of, I don't want to say a lot of people. Some people might think that the power dynamic lies within the artist. Like we have all the power in the dynamic, but we don't. It's actually within the audience because the moment they decide to not listen, then you have effectively killed your poem. You're performing to four walls, and let's be honest, we do that as we practice on a daily basis, anyways. So your poem has been served like as non-effective. Um, but not that that's the experience that I had, but to dump something so heavy onto an audience that you haven't fully figured out yet, and then force them to try to like figure it out, deal with it, not necessarily with you, but having to carry that weight, I think is very, very unfair. Um, so poems like that, had I wrote it today, I probably wouldn't have brought to stage. I probably would have sat with it, processed it, and then now when I write, I try to have, even if it's rough stuff, you got to end it with a bit of hope, I think, for yourself as the poet and for the audience as well. Um, Especially there's a little bit of a period where a lot of poets were just writing trauma poetry, that's what we called it, and it scored well. It was very, very easy to score with. If you wrote a trauma poem, you were going to get scores. And so, like, some of them became a little bit disingenuous, and the poetry slams and the shows became so heavy because it was just like trauma after trauma after trauma. And I feel like the creativity kind of suffered a little bit because of it. Everyone's trauma is valid, don't get me wrong, but I feel like you shouldn't bring it to stage until you've fully processed it, for your own sake too. I've seen poets who it affected them emotionally so bad that like they would have seizures or like they would break down, and they would leave the slam right after they finished performing. They would like dart off and like just be in the hallway bawling and stuff. And it's like, I get that there it needs to be an emotional release, but I think the some of the healing needs to be done alone and with your close circle before you bring it to a room full of strangers effectively. So uh, by journaling now, like it helps me kind of not only get in touch with myself, not only connect with myself, but also it's a great visual guide of, okay, this is probably something that I don't want to share. I wrote a lot of grief poems after my cousin passed away due to gun violence. My best friend Dovi, who introduced me to the spoken word community here in Ottawa, he passed away. One of my close classmates, Maimona, one of my best friends growing up, Abdul, my dad. Like there's a lot of grief poems that I wrote, and I'm like, these are poems for me, and by keeping it just for myself, I feel like it's sacred in its own right. Yeah. Um, I think my art connects with others just in the sense that I try to write direct. Metaphors, I do use metaphors, I do use similes, but I feel like I always tell myself like the direct approach is the best approach. And some of the themes I do write about, like I write about family a lot, I write about, my place within today's society, grief, love, heartbreak, which is like stuff common to a lot of poets. But the thing about emotion is, and the commonalities, there's a reason why I would say a good, like, at least 70% plus of the music industry is about love. Like, it's just a relatable emotion. Everybody feels it, everybody has it. And emotions in general, like, most people feel them, most people have them. And to be able to write in a sense of, this is how I feel, and this is how I felt in the moment. I like to think when I'm writing that what I'm writing is a snapshot of a moment that I've experienced, and the outcome of what I've learned, and try to like pass that knowledge on. And sometimes even the most personal poems, like again, as an example, My Hero Drives a Cab is about my dad's experience coming to Canada as a master's degree in psychology, a master's student, and then having to work as a cab driver. There's a lot of people who've had that experience, who've had parents come or like very educated and have to do jobs just to get by. So I think the relatability lies within the commonality as human beings that we all have, and writing. Even if I'm not always conscious of it, like you tap into that. There's always going to be people in the room that are going to feel and resonate with what you're saying. Which again, all the more reason why it's very, very important to take care of the audience and to take care of yourself throughout the creative process. and not get swept up in the destructive wave that can come with creation, because it can be, if you're only writing like the destructive poems and not necessarily trying to heal through it, then it could do more harm than good. It reminds me of, I started a free after-school youth program with the main branch of the Ottawa Public Library. I love the Ottawa Public Library. It was called You Speak. It ran once a week. It was a drop-in, drop-out session, and I created it just from my need for when I was growing up. I didn't have stuff like this. My parents didn't have money to put us in any artistic practices and workshops and stuff like that. So everything I've learned was self-taught. And I was like, if I can fast track the youth, and there's a lot of dope creatives in the city that joined in to this weekly workshop, and it was free, and they donated their time. We didn't have the funding for it, so we just kind of did it. And drop in, drop out, because I know parents work and stuff like that. There was no such thing as late, and there's no such thing as leaving early. You come in, you write, you engage. And there's one group home kid that we got who came, and he was dealing with a lot. He would always come in, always wearing black, always had his hoodie up, refused to engage with people, would write very dark poetry, very, very dark poetry. And then just being around art and creatives and, seeing that there's other sides of art that you can, I can use my art to write about this, or I can think about that when I'm writing. It doesn't always have to be about this. It really opened him up. And then by the end, he was smiling, laughing, he would engage with, he made great lifelong friends through the workshop. And I think just having that in itself is that's the value of art. That's what art can do. Art is transformative, So every year that I create, I try to outdo my last year, and I always write it down. I'm a very tactile person. I like to write everything. I still write with a pen and notebook. I can write digitally, I just don't prefer it. I find it's very grounding to be able to just put pen to page, But I always write out, okay, this is all my successes that I had in the year. These are all, I don't like to call them failures, but these are all the lessons that I could have tightened up on. How can I outdo this for next year? And by having a blueprint like that from year to year, not only can you track your progression, but it also, by writing something down, I feel like it's more likely to come to pass. There is transformative power in thought, and also transference in getting it out and making it tangible. So as I spoke to it a little bit, I got 2 books in the works right now. I made t-shirts this year, which I have merch, prints, art prints as well. Shout out to Snake Boy, amazing spoken word artist, tattoo artist in the city. I collaborated with him to do the designs, and he just knocked it out of the park. I got a band, Funky Colors. We're putting out our EP soon. Snake Boy did the art for that as well. We had 3 singles, 2 singles, and the album art. We released our first single, Mike Miller, September 4th. We got Crayon Love coming out soon. The project's called Botto, Blasting Off This Tired Earth. I'm excited to Blasting Off This Tired Oval. It was Blasting Off This Tired Earth, but we changed it because it was just not a good acronym. Didn't flow off the tongue as well. I got the Cinepoem, the short film that I want to put out. I might be putting out a little bit more Cinepoems. I only ever put out the one. But shout out to kids. They did get me with a live performance for the poem that I did in Atlanta with the Outcast reference. So it's I want to put together a spoken word EP with some music. I want to just create more. Now, how do I see that evolving in terms of personal healing with others and myself? I don't really see it changing much, to be honest. Just try to connect with as many people as I can, grow my artistic practice that way, and also grow healing through connection as well, make myself available to whoever needs me. It's something that I do. I feel like my inbox is always open, although I might not always respond right away because, I juggle a lot. But in terms of the future, that's stuff that I really, really look forward to, is being able to kind of continue to grow, continue to become more and more international, break out of the national scene. I've done it a little bit. COVID kind of capped me a little bit, but I want to kind of get back to that goal again. And just keep my boots to the ground. I've always been a very streetwise, boot to the ground poet, where I want to still connect with a lot of the new upcomers and help guide them and steer them in the direction, and just provide them the the rudder that I didn't have when I first started. You know, having to figure it all out for myself, that can be overwhelming, and you can fast track success when you're like, hey, this is all my experience that led me here. You can avoid all of this, and just if you stick to this, you will see results a lot quicker. You know, instead of having to like figure it out. Have people come up to you and tell you your poem sucks, here's why. Then you're going back to the drawing board. And you're like, all right, what can I do? What can I take out? So, yeah, just continue being a creative. Just live, you know. For sure, just keep at it. Honestly, art is a skill. Writing is a skill. You get better the more you do it. Um, Even if you're not, you know, creating for others or you know looking to perform it, you know, eventually maybe down the line, yeah. But just keep creating, keep writing. It's like riding a bike. Ironically, I don't know how to ride a bike, but it's like riding a bike. You know, you polish it off. You don't get up and expect to just like maintain balance and ride right away. You know, you gotta follow a little bit, and then eventually it becomes seamless. It becomes second nature. But that won't happen if you're not creating. But also, it's okay if you take a little bit of a break. You know, you don't always have to create, especially in this day and age when everything is content. Everything is content. You know, and it's like I had to learn to stop looking at my art as content and just look at it as like extensions of myself. And it's like, you know, if I put it out, if it resonates with people, that's cool. If it doesn't, that's cool. You know, I'm still gonna create another poem. Like, I'm still gonna keep doing what I'm doing. And with that, like, don't get discouraged. Everything is ups and downs. You know, you never know what might hit and what might not. It doesn't make it invalid just because it didn't hit as much as you thought it would. Like, just get into the practice of creating, you know. All right, shout out to In Bloom. Thank you so much for having me. Once again, my name is Khaleefa Hamdan. I go by Sage and Father the Child. We do spoken word for and hip hop and various stuff for 14 years. Check me out. Stay connected with myself and with In Bloom. They're doing some dope stuff as well, and I'm excited for you to see what In Bloom has in store for you.